Previously, the group received their gifts from another world, and Rylan spent some time figuring out just what the fuck they were. Especially the shovel. I mean, really, what kind of asshole sent a shovel between worlds as a so-called important gift? The group decided that they'd stay inside the mountain for the night since it was getting late. Rylan and Taria did some investigating and found a few interesting items that seemed to potentially be very useful. Tarnak went to check on Yuri as he'd headed out of the cabin shortly after Kovar passed away, and he found him asleep in the entryway. He then joined him for a nap. Meanwhile, Ryland made friends with a new voice in his head after attuning to a sentient staff. Its name was Ashwell, and it was an archivist. It wasn't thrilled to be in another plane, but that's just the luck of the draw. The two of them started in on a long conversation about the differences in the stars between the two planes. Sean eventually went searching for Tordak and Yuri, waking them up and convincing them to come back downstairs to join the rest of them. She also filled Yuri in a little on what he'd missed, since he hadn't even been there when the talking to other planes happened. And, one of the gifts that the other plane sent might possibly be the key to bringing Jaya back, so he probably needed to know about it. Taria borrowed the shield she'd previously made for Tornak in order to work on upgrading it a bit. Everyone eventually settled in to get some sleep for the night. The next morning, they briefly discussed having Ryland attempt to teleport them to their destination in the Scorch Basin, but the DM, Ashwell, the sentient staff, highly suggested they not do that. The staff had spent the night reading the ley lines, and it got the impression that the ones from the north were staticky in a bad way, so there was a good chance they might die if they tried. So they went back to using their magically created bounce. As the day proceeded, the temperature started to rise as they descended from the mountains. It grew warmer and warmer as they headed through a brief section of green before reaching the desert. They realized that the heat was coming from the ground itself, not the sun. There were vents of mud that bubbled and occasionally geysers. Ryland and Taria quickly realized that the ley lines there were definitely broken. Something was wrong with that entire land. They wanted to travel as quickly as possible, all things considered, so Ryland created some oil of slipperiness to put on all of the horses so that they could travel quickly since it was difficult terrain. Many comments were made about lubing up the horses. Many. That night, they lucked out and found an almost calm place to camp for the night, which would have been more impressive if they hadn't woken up the next morning to discover that Taria was slowly turning into a reptile or something. It's fine. Nothing to worry about. Around that point, Ryland realized that the bag of holding was just a normal bag, and the group had no access to anything inside it because of the messed up ley lines, which made them a little concerned about their ship in a bottle, especially since the people on the ship inside the bottle let them know that the magic door had disappeared. The group set out, and they quickly became utterly lost. They ended up coming to a giant mesa with melted obsidian along its side that had runes carved into it. Taria read them and realized that they were draconic runes that simply said territory of the sovereign. Nothing to worry about, right? Ryland put one and one together to get two and realized that only a red dragon would call itself sovereign while writing in Draconic, and anything calling the wasteland home was probably ancient. Without warning, Taria suddenly transformed some more, becoming much more noticeably dragon-like in her appearance. At which point, a bunch of kobolds started shooting fire arrows at the group out of nowhere. And that is where we left off.